My name is Daniel Carter. I was 34 years old, and the date was March 14th, 2015. I remember that morning as though the sky itself had turned steel. The air in Georgia was unseasonably cool, a chill that trailed through the parking lot of Pine Ridge Police Department and into my bones as they cuffed me. I'd been convicted for a crime I didn't commit, armed robbery at a convenience store I'd never stepped inside, and that false conviction would send me to Ravenwood Correctional Facility, a place whose very name promised isolation and terror. I still shudder when I recall the drive down Highway 52, the miles ticking by beneath the prison van's rickety suspension. Outside, traders at roadside stands sold sweet tea and peanuts. Inside, I clutched the bars of my cage like a lifeline. The tall, barbed wire fences of Ravenwood loomed ahead, iron teeth scraping the sky. Warden Patrick Sullivan stood at the gate, his black uniform crisp, gaze unreadable. "Welcome to your new home, Carter," he said, voice low as gravel. No sympathy in his eyes, just another inmate in the ledger. My first cell was with a man called Kevin O'Neill, a wiry kid with haunted eyes, convicted of manslaughter as a juvenile. Kevin was quiet, polite even, but the lines around his mouth told stories I never wanted to hear. Across the hall was Big Jack Thompson, 6'4", broad as an ox, nicknamed the Gentle Giant by the few who dared speak his name. He ran his fingers over his skull tattoo in greeting, murmuring, "Watch your back, kid." That was my introduction to the social order. Alliances forged in fear, respect demanded by muscle, and every man looking to protect what little he had. In those first weeks, I learned the rhythms of Ravenwood. Morning counts at dawn, breakfast in a cafeteria that smelled of stale grits and iron, daily chores in the laundry and the yard. Jessica Miller, one of the newer guards, had a softer touch. Her voice, though clipped, was kinder than most. She'd pass by the cells with her clipboard and sometimes catch my eye, offering a nod that felt almost like comfort. Others, men like Deputy Shields, took sadistic enjoyment in barking orders, prodding us with pepper spray canisters when we didn't move fast enough. The psychologist, Dr. Evelyn Ross, made her rounds every Tuesday. She asked me about nightmares, about my home back in Atlanta, about my mother's failing health. I watched her lips pursed in sympathy, but I could never tell if she believed my story. To her, I was another brick in the wall of criminal pathology. I confess, when she left my cell after those visits, I felt the desperation of a man crushed beneath walls too high to climb. By the end of the first month, I knew every corridor and every hidden crack in the walls where insect carcasses gathered like confetti. I felt the weight of despair settle in my gut. Letters from my lawyer trickled in, a handwritten scrawl promising appeals and hope. Yet each one felt like ash I couldn't swallow. Kevin O'Neill, my cellmate, would whisper to me at night, "They break you here, Danny. It's what they do." His voice trembled as though he had already seen the darkness at its heart. Despite it all, whispers would fly of an old tunnel system under Block C, legends born from decades of whispers and vanished inmates. They said it was dug by prisoners in the 40s, a mile or more of narrow passageways carved beneath the very foundations of Ravenwood. No one knew where it truly led. Some said to the river beyond the perimeter. Others insisted it emptied into a drainage culvert by the highway. It was just one rumor among many, until the night I stumbled upon its entrance. It was Wednesday, April 29th, 2015, at exactly 11:47 p.m. The lights in the cell block flickered. Standard practice, the guards would say, but that night the darkness felt purposeful. The alarms had stopped screaming. The intercom was silent. I lay awake, listening to the distant drip of water and the soft breathing of Kevin beside me. Somewhere in the dark, someone cried out, not a yell of anger, but a strangled gasp of sheer terror. Unable to sleep, I slipped from my bunk, careful to keep my eyes adjusted to the black. Outside our cell, the corridor was empty, the metal gate hanging half ajar. I crept forward, heart hammering, until I reached the old laundry chute. A vent long since sealed, but the maintenance grate had been pried open, the lock left dangling. Beyond it lay a narrow shaft, crawling with rusted rivets and whispering drafts of air. I paused, hand on the grate's edge, and I heard Kevin's voice behind me. "Danny, don't." But the pull of hope, any hope, was irresistible. I hoisted myself up and dropped into the chute. The world inverted around me as I slid down 20 feet of metal, my back scraping against rust. When I landed, I found myself in a cramped, stone-lined tunnel. Water trickled along one side. The air tasted of mildew and earth. I shone my makeshift light, an old cigarette lighter I'd stolen, and saw the tunnel stretching into darkness. Rows of wooden supports bowed under untold pressure. I wanted to run back, slam the grate, and pretend I'd seen nothing. But something in me, an urgency, a will to survive, propelled me forward. With each step, I thought of my mother, of my vindication still lost in courts and appeals. I thought of Kevin's eyes, so fearful, and I pictured Big Jack's silent warning. Somewhere ahead was freedom or something far worse. My lighter sputtered, casting warped shadows on jagged walls. Then I heard it, the echo of footsteps, slow and deliberate. I froze as a figure emerged from the darkness. Tall, gaunt, face obscured by a hooded sweatshirt. The man's boots were caked with mud, his hands trembling as he held a crude lantern. "Daniel Carter," he said, voice a rasp of surprise and relief. "I saw you slip in. You shouldn't have come." It was Henry Oldtimer McAllister, inmate number B10356, sentenced for second-degree murder in 1963. They said he'd lived down here for years, presiding over the tunnel like a king in a rotten citadel. His eyes glowed in the lantern light. "You can't trust what's above," he told me. "They'll kill you to keep this place secret." His words fell like an executioner's hammer. Behind him, the tunnel forked in two directions. One path sloping downward toward a faint, rushing sound. The other climbing steeply toward a grid of beams that I recognized as the foundation of the cell block. McAllister pushed past me and took the downward path. "That way leads outside, to Mill Creek," he whispered. "But the current's strong. You gotta be careful." My heart thundered as I followed. Water began to lap at my ankles, then up to my knees. The tunnel narrowed until I was crouched, each breath frosty as I plunged deeper. The air grew thick with the stink of rot. Then came a low rumble. A tremor? No, the unmistakable roar of water above my head. We were directly beneath Mill Creek itself, rushing in a steel culvert built half a century before. McAllister scooted ahead, disappearing into the darkness. I hesitated, mind screaming warnings, then crawled after him. The current grew louder, and soon I was inches from a grated opening where daylight speared through. Our exit. My pulse raced as I heaved myself out of the cold water and slid onto muddy ground beside the creek, the night sky stretching beyond. It was April's last gasp, stars glittering like promises. McAllister was gone. Just a crooked lantern perched on a rock, its flame dancing. I looked around, no sign of the guard towers, no wire fences. Only nature and the river's lullaby. I staggered east, away from the prison lights, toward the county road. At dawn, I found a farmhouse, banged on the door until a stunned couple let me in. They dialed 911, and by noon, my escape was front-page news. Weeks later, appeals were expedited. My conviction was overturned. Warden Sullivan retired under a cloud of accusations. I visited Ravenwood one last time, accompanied by law enforcement. The tunnel's entrance was sealed forever, but I knew it was still there, a hidden artery of terror and hope carved beneath those walls. I never saw Old-Timer again. Some say the guards found him caught in the tunnel months later, emaciated, his lantern cold, eyes empty. Others believe he slipped away into the swamp, a ghost among the cypress. As for me, I returned to Atlanta, embraced my mother's frail arms, and began to rebuild a life stolen and returned. Some nights, I still feel that tunnel's chill, hear the drip of water, and wonder whether I truly escaped or merely crossed into a deeper kind of prison. But I live in freedom now, telling this story so the world never forgets the terrors hidden behind fences and locked doors. This story is over. Get ready for the next one. My name is John Miller. I was 32 years old on the morning of March 14th, 2018, the day my life was irrevocably changed within the walls of Redwood Correctional Facility. I've told this story so many times that sometimes the details blur, but I'll do my best to recount everything exactly as it happened. I grew up in Cedar Falls, Iowa, a quiet town where nobody ever locked their doors. I'd always thought myself invincible, a small-town boy with a big city dream. After high school, I moved to Denver, where I got into the wrong crowd. A rash decision led to an armed robbery, nothing violent, but enough to land me a 5-year sentence at Redwood, a maximum security prison hidden among dense pines in Northern California. Before my incarceration, I worked as a bartender at the Blue Lantern, where I met Lisa Harper, my fiancée. She'd been my lifeline, promising to wait for me, visiting every other weekend with homemade cookies and a bright smile that cut through the sterile visitation room's metal barriers. My family rarely visited. My younger brother, Mark, was the only one who showed up regularly, though he claimed it was out of guilt more than love. The morning I arrived at Redwood, the sky was overcast, and a cold drizzle fell as 2 guards escorted me from the bus to the intake holding. I'll never forget the sharp, metallic clang of that first cell door locking behind me. My cellmate was Marcus Big Mike Daniels, a hulking man with a shaved head and a gold tooth that glinted under the dim fluorescent lights. He claimed he'd been there 8 years for armed assault and warned me, "This place eats rookies alive." He wasn't kidding. In those first weeks, I learned the prison's unwritten rules. Never make eye contact with the Aryan Brotherhood. Always pay your debts to the Vipers gang quickly. And never, ever trust the guards, especially Sergeant Harris. Harris was a grizzled veteran with a reputation for brutality. Rumor had it he once left a prisoner in solitary so long the man lost his mind. I tried to keep my head down, do my time, and cling to the hope of parole. By the 3rd month, I'd settled into a routine. Wake at 5:30 a.m. to the blaring siren, shower, line up for breakfast, and labor in the metal shop until lights out at 9 p.m. The work was monotonous, shaping steel bars and welding door frames, but it kept me busy. Big Mike watched over me, and despite his tough talk, he saved me from trouble more than once, stepping between me and an angry guard or breaking up fights. Then came the day everything changed. It started with a new prisoner, Danny Ortiz, 25, small but wiry, convicted of drug trafficking. He arrived the same day I got a letter from Lisa saying she'd moved on. The words hit me harder than any punch. I tore up the letter in my cell, but the sting lingered. Danny, noticing my distress, offered me a sympathetic nod as we lined up for lunch. Lunch trays clanked. The stale smell of institutional food hung heavy. That afternoon, Harris singled Danny out in the yard, accusing him of loitering near the fence. Next thing anyone saw, Harris had slammed Danny against the wire mesh, cuffs tight, and yanked him down to the cement floor. Danny tried to shield his head, but Harris booted him in the ribs twice before 3 other guards hauled him away. We never saw Danny again. Speculation spread like wildfire. Some said Danny was in solitary for weeks. Others whispered worse. Big Mike told me to keep my mouth shut, to forget I'd even seen it. But I couldn't. Every night, I lay in my bunk listening to distant screams echo down the corridors. What nobody knew was that Danny had been my only friend in that place. His sudden disappearance left a void I couldn't fill, and I began to unravel. I started skipping meals, punching the metal walls until my knuckles bled, and talking to myself in the shower stalls. Harris noticed. He'd strut by my cell, grin, and whisper, "You're next, Miller." That threat finally broke me. One late evening, I crawled under the fence of the recreation yard. Something Big Mike had always warned was impossible. I found a loose panel, slipped through, and ran into the forest beyond. My heart pounded so hard I was sure they'd hear it. But as I sprinted, branches whipped my face and my vision blurred. 2 spotlights cut through the trees behind me. Harris's voice boomed, "Stop in the name of the state." I froze. Guards surrounded me, guns drawn. I dropped to my knees, hands in the air. They cuffed me so tightly I thought my wrists would shatter. They dragged me back to Redwood, where Harris personally escorted me to the isolation block, solitary confinement A wing. Solitary was hell condensed. A 6x8 cell with a steel slab for a bed, a metal toilet, and a tiny window too high to see out of. No natural light, no human voice except the occasional guard barking orders. They served me plain bread and rancid water through a slot in the door. I spent 23 hours a day staring at damp concrete, listening to my own breathing echo off the walls. Each day bled into the next. I lost track of time. My hands shook, and shadows danced in my mind. My only contact was when Harris slid a tray through the slot and sneered, "Enjoying the view, Miller?" Then he'd laugh and walk away, his boots echoing down the corridor like a death knell. After 2 weeks, they moved me to solitary B-wing. It was a step up, they said. I thought it might mean I'd done something right. Instead, they jammed me into a cell next to the sewer line. The smell was unbearable. I slept standing up to avoid the stench. Every night I screamed until my throat burned, begging for mercy, praying for death. No one heard me, but as the days dragged on, something inside gave way. I stopped feeling fear. I stopped caring about escape or survival. I became a hollow shell. Then one night, I felt the faintest hum beneath the floor, water dripping rhythmically, then silence. I pressed my ear to the cold concrete. There it was again, drip, drip, drip. I traced the sound along the cell's sole ventilation grate and discovered a rusted screw head protruding. Over the next 3 nights, I used my eyeglasses' metal frame to loosen the grate, piece by piece, until I could pry it free. The shaft beyond was cramped but damp, smelling of rot and raw sewage. It was madness, but I squeezed through, sliding down a narrow pipe until I fell into a void beneath the building's foundation. My clothes were soaked, and I emerged in a filter room where the water pumps roared. I crept through the maze of pipes, guided by the faint glow of an emergency exit sign. I crawled past sleeping night shift workers in the boiler room who never noticed the dripping, bedraggled man in coveralls slip by. I followed the sign up a metal staircase and pushed open a door into the chill night air. I was free, sort of. Outside, the guards realized I was missing. Searchlights swept the grounds, dog teams roamed the perimeter, and guards called my name through megaphones. I headed into the forest, away from the fence, covered in mud and panting like an animal. Behind me, the alarms grew fainter. That night, I walked 30 miles through dense woods, guided by the stars and an old Boy Scout compass I'd stolen from the supply closet. When I finally emerged on a gravel road, I was at least 50 miles from Redwood. I hitched a ride to the nearest town, bought a bus ticket with cash I'd hidden in my boot, and rode until I saw streetlights of Sacramento. My breathing slowed when I passed the Capitol building, its dome glowing in the pre-dawn haze. I walked into an all-night diner called Rosie's Place, ordered black coffee and eggs, and stared at my reflection in the window. My eyes were sunken, my clothes shredded. A waitress asked if I was okay. I shook my head, tears spilling out. I knew I couldn't go home. I'd be a fugitive forever. But I couldn't stay. I called a lawyer I'd bribed in prison, Corinne Blake, a defense attorney who'd promised to help me. She arranged for me to turn myself in under a deal to testify against Redwood's corrupt guards. Within weeks, Harris and 2 other officers were arrested on charges of assault and kidnapping. Danny Ortiz was still missing, presumed dead, but his name lived on in the trial transcripts. I served 3 more months, this time in a county facility under protective custody. But it was nothing like Redwood. I was released on November 2nd, 2018, and walked out into the sunlight with permanent scars on my mind and body. Today, I work with Human Rights Watch to expose abuses behind prison walls. I speak at conferences and write op-eds, hoping no one else endures what I did. My name is John Miller, and I know the true meaning of terror and the strength it takes to survive it. This story is over. Get ready for the next one.